Good morning, Lincoln. Hello, hunters. My name is Mira, and welcome to a sit-down video. I do these whenever I feel like I have something a little extra to say. Not necessarily important, just I want to have a conversation, I guess. And this time I want to take some time to talk about Caleb's card, or more importantly, I guess, share my interpretation of this card. This card sparked a lot of conversation, and well, I'm super grateful that most of the intensity stayed where it needed to stay, which is on X and Twitter. I still feel it's really important to open the door to a more thoughtful discussion around it and a more literary discussion around the card. I've seen a lot of discourse, and it tends to land very quickly on a few conclusions. Either it was good, it was bad, it shouldn't have existed, or just get over it. And I don't think really any of those takes are very good ones. Sorry, guys. But I think there's more going on here than a simple pass or fail reaction. Love and Deepspace, luckily, is a game that invites readers' interpretation very heavily in a lot of aspects. It leaves a lot of things very ambiguous, which is part of the reason why I enjoy this game. But because of that, I also think it's important and worth slowing down and examining the cards that do invite heavy interpretation for its narrative choices, the character portrayals, the portrayals, not betrayals. I realized that I didn't say that correctly. And also the impact it could have on different players. If interpretation is part of the game and how it functions, then I think as a community, we should be able to hold a space for discussions. Whether that means agreeing or disagreeing, or simply understanding that multiple reactions can exist at the same time. I do want to make sure that I'm very clear on one thing up front, though. As I've mentioned in my Caleb card reaction, this isn't a place for moral judgment. This isn't about debating whether people should accept it or leave, or not argue whether the card should exist at all. That's not what I'm here for. What I'm here to do is reflect on the storytelling. More of the narrative intent, the execution, and how these different choices may have shaped the way that people interpreted the story as a whole. So if you do choose to leave a comment, I'm just asking super nicely that it's done in a respectful and thoughtful way and in the spirit of discussion, not judgment. I also want to be super transparent about something. This is about what I'm bringing to the conversation, because I think context matters. I'm someone who generally is very comfortable engaging in the uncomfortable. In fact, I actually live for it. I love to be uncomfortable when it comes to media. The more uncomfortable I feel, the better I think the story is a lot of the times. Now, of course, it really does matter on context and delivery, but I've spent a lot of time with movies and reading materials such as Requiem for a Dream, Mother, Flowers in the Attic, and while I don't think it's very decisive, also, though, very uncomfortable, was Corpse Party, if you're familiar with that. But these are all pieces that engage in taboo subjects, trauma, moral discomfort, and all in very different ways. Some are intentional, some are messy, some successful, no, some not really. Anyways, the point is that I'm very comfortable with being uncomfortable. I love trauma-induced movies. I love when representation of trauma and the way it makes you feel uncomfortable is available to people, because I think it really, the more uncomfortable it is, the more rooted in reality it is. Because of that, my response to this card wasn't rooted in shock alone. It was rooted in how the story chose to handle the subject matter and how it decided to frame the relationship between Caleb and MC. What it asked of the audience to sit with, and whether the framing was earned, whether it was coherent, and if it was respectful. With that in mind, I want to talk about the 3 questions that I brought with me to this card and why they matter. My first question that I brought was, did they do the relationship justice? And by that, I don't mean whether the relationship was interesting or dramatic, because it definitely was interesting and dramatic. But whether Caleb and MC were portrayed in a way that aligned with their established personalities. And now, of course, this is an AU. I'm well aware that this is an AU, and the possibilities are endless. But in an Otome game, part of why we grow attached to these characters is because of the personality traits and the emotional patterns that carry across the stories. Not just the surface level archetypes like the childhood friend or the mob boss or god and follower, but the deeper personality tropes that make each of the characters feel recognizable. So really the question became, did the story maintain character integrity and emotional consistency, or did it flatten the already morally complex dynamic that Caleb and MC have into something that relied primarily on shock value rather than meaningful development? The second question was the incest necessary to the plot? More specifically, did the narrative need the taboo element to function, or was it used to heighten the impact through discomfort alone? I was paying attention to whether the story relied heavily on charged language or implication to move the narrative forward, or whether these elements were doing, I guess, deeper thematic work. Could the same tension, intimacy, and stakes have been achieved without leaning heavily on the taboo? Or at least be handled, I guess, with more restraint? I don't know. Anyways, this isn't about whether taboo can exist in fiction. It's about whether it was being used with intent, or whether it was overstated for the emotional and visual impact. And my last question was, did the storytelling prioritize clarity? This is where the ambiguity becomes important. Is the ambiguity in this story intentional and well supported, or was it muddied by localization choices, or maybe explicit framing or conflicting language? And how that may have lacked, or, the lack of clarity or the ambiguity, how that affected different readers' interpretations of the relationship and its implications. Basically, did the ambiguity enhance the story by inviting interpretation, or did it hinder the narrative by creating confusion around what the story was actually asking the audience to engage with? All of this ambiguity, though, linguistic, cultural, and narrative, doesn't exist in a vacuum. Stories that play with taboo, especially with royalty and mythic frameworks, have been doing it for centuries. If we step back and look at this card through a literary lens, what it's engaging with is far from new. Incest or symbolic kinship or shared origins have long been used in storytelling to explore a ton of ideas. Sometimes it's romanticized, sometimes it's villainized. But before evaluating whether this card did a good job in its execution, I think it's important to understand the history of the trope and how it's been used differently across cultures and eras. It actually appears across a ton of genres and traditions. Myths, tragedies, modern literature, visual novels. Also, I want to be very clear. I'm not citing these examples to suggest that any one culture, language, or society endorses incest. Far from it, actually. In fact, the Chinese culture, romantic and otherwise relationships between siblings is widely taboo. And the language itself often distinguishes emotional closeness rather than literal blood relation. My goal here is to purely be literal or literary, not literal, sorry, to show that these themes have been explored as a narrative device for symbolism, emotional intensity, and tragic consequences, not to be normalized in reality. Please pin that in your head. There are some historical examples. Greek mythology has a lot of examples from the gods and stuff like that, but one notable one is Oedipus Rex, who married his mother. Gross. It's a classic example where incest is led to catastrophe, punishment, and existential horror. It often signals limits in human agency and moral consequences. On the flip side, Egyptian mythology has Osiris and Isis, siblings and spouses who were said to have fallen in love in the mother's womb. This often symbolizes unity, rebirth, and cosmic balance. We all know where that goes. Incest for the Egyptian mythology is often about divine and completeness rather than personal desire and taboo. For modern, you have Flowers in the Attic. It frames incest through a lens of isolation, trauma, and emotional dependency, which is so. We also see that in this game. It's disturbing, but it's intentionally romanticized within the narrative logic. It's blurring the lines between intimacy and unease on purpose. And really, in fact, a lot of these themes align closely with Caleb and MC's established relationship. The narrative often explores destruction, obsession, trauma, and intense emotional dependency, which are actually connected to the main story, Caleb and MC, not just in this AU. But when incest appears as a romantic element, it usually serves as a narrative purpose, usually unity, fate, creation, and a sense of two beings completing each other. which, again, is very on par with Caleb and MC. On the flip side, though, incest is often villainized. It is framed as taboo and destructive, forbidden, and destabilizing. In a royal context, which is more for the AU, it often symbolizes a collapse of hierarchy rather than a benefit. But both approaches, romanticized or villainized, have a precedence. And what matters really is how the story frames it. Is it tragic or is it inevitable? Is it symbolic or is it literal? Is it integrated or justified or just simply implied? And really, I think one of the important questions is does it develop the character or does it replace the character development with shock? Honestly, the contrast is crucial when evaluating whether a modern story, especially in an otome, is used as is using the trope intentionally, or rather than relying on it without a significant narrative support. What complicates things further, though, speaking of otome, is the medium itself. In literature and myths, incest is often observed from a distance, but in an otome, the player is participating emotionally. They aren't just watching it happen. And I think that proximity is really important to distinguish. Even if the story intends the relationship to be symbolic or ambiguous, some players may find it compelling and immersive, which I think is totally acceptable. But others might also feel like it's a personal boundary that's being crossed, even if similar themes wouldn't bother them otherwise. Of course, I'm not saying either response is wrong. I'm honestly just reflecting on how interactive romance asks more of its audience than passive storytelling. So really the question isn't whether this trope belongs in fiction, because it clearly does. I mean, it appears over time in several different cultures. The question is whether this story understood what it was borrowing and whether it was used effectively. So, what are my final thoughts on the card? I want to start out by saying that I liked Caleb's card. The concepts, the ideas, the emotional push and pull, a lot of it was there. There was actually one scene, the one where they're in the garden, where they're talking and reminiscing. It's very reminiscent of main story Caleb. And that's really the part that I enjoy about his character. The way he shifts between treating MC kindly and the music matching, and then switching to intimidating. Again, the music swapping. It was very nice. Very classic Caleb. And again, yes, I'm a very messy person. I like my men a little toxic. For clarity, I don't condone actual men treating women this way. But it does make Caleb a compelling character for me. It's part of the reasons why I think he's kind of attractive. That being said, there are areas where I felt the card fell short. Of course, any criticism here is purely my interpretation, not an absolute statement. As far as the use of brother and sister, I think it could have worked much better if the context had been a little bit clearer. I think this is specifically for the English language. Again, just because we're very literal. The term felt like it served two very different purposes for me. When Caleb used them, it seemed more like a grounding mechanism, like a tragic reminder, really, of where he stood in MC's life and how their relationship was. Not like a control tactic or anything, at first it didn't feel like a way to heighten the taboo. It felt more tragic than anything. And then when MC used it, it felt more like a snide remark, like she was pushing back against Caleb with how often he said baby sister. So those are the two ways that I got it. I also occasionally felt like the term was almost symbolic and used as a title rather than literal familial indicators, blah, 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 blah. And I think the ambiguity could have been effective, but it felt really inconsistent, which made scenes confusing. One additional pattern I noticed also is that Caleb often used the term baby sister immediately before the initiation of an intimate scene. And over time, the repetition began to affect how the taboo itself landed for me. Rather than deepening the tension or reinforcing the gravity of the boundary being crossed, it started to feel more like a cue, like a signal that intimacy was about to follow. In that sense, the language felt less like a meaningful narrative device and more like a shortcut, which I felt undercut the legitimacy of the taboo and leaned closer to shock value than the intentional storytelling. Now, that doesn't mean that the discomfort was accidental or meaningless, but the timing of the term's usage made the ambiguity feel less earned and more performative than it might have been with different framing. That paired with how abruptly many of the intimate scenes arrive, I felt like the repeated use of baby sister began to feel less like a meaningful boundary and more like a signal of escalation. Without sufficient buildup, the language didn't deepen the taboo. I felt like it actually diluted it. It made the moments feel less narratively earned. This is also where one of my core issues comes in. The ambiguity between romanticizing and villainizing the incestuous undertones. It mixed between flowers in the attic and Osiris and Isis. And I wasn't sure entirely how to feel. Caleb and MC's main story relationship is already morally complex. Possessive, obsessive, emotionally intense. And in the AU, the card attempted to make the relationship feel both romantic and forbidden at once. Because of the localization choices and the framing, I don't think that it fully translated. It left me feeling unsure a lot of the time. I wasn't sure how to feel. Maybe that was the intent, to kind of mirror the confusion between MC might be experiencing and Caleb might be experiencing. But from a narrative standpoint, it made the story feel kind of off kilter. The tension between romance and taboo sometimes overshadowed the deeper complexity of that the AU could have explored in the long run. My feelings on the bedroom scene are actually genuinely conflicted, because I really liked this scene, actually. On a character level, it worked a lot. At the beginning, we see a very familiar version of Caleb. It's a constant tug of war between restraint and obsession. He starts out very reasonable, very gentle, but when MC is not responding the way he wants her to, the scene turns around so quickly. so quickly. Spoilers, the reveal of that man wrapped in the carpet out of jealousy and Caleb threatening to throw him out of the building was very dark and unsettling and so completely in character for Caleb. It was very clear on the escalation of tension, and I was 100% into it. That is part of the reasons why I thoroughly enjoy Caleb. I love that switch on him. It's so good. It's so good. It feels so good. But where this scene starts to lose me is about halfway through. And I guess I could say the same about the garden one. It feels like anytime they really show my Caleb, I don't know how else to. Anytime they show main story Caleb, it's accompanied by a scene that sort of just feels haphazardly inserted. It feels less of like a continuation of tension and more of just a justification to insert spicy. And it kind of lost its credibility for me. It wasn't even about the choice, the brother-lover choice. It really came down to placement and framing. The choice, the outcome of the choice doesn't matter, which, again, necessarily wouldn't have been a problem on its own. But because the story hadn't firmly established the rules of the world, whether the rules were familial or political or symbolic or mythic or whatever, the case may be, the intimacy felt unmoored. It didn't sharpen the ambiguity. It sort of amplified it in a way that felt really uneven to me. I think if that scene in particular, the whole bedroom scene, had been placed different in any other narrative context, I would have really enjoyed it. I would have actually been very receptive to it. Or maybe if the hierarchy of the environment had been a little more clearly established beforehand, I think the whole thing would have landed differently for me. The intimacy could have reinforced both the emotional tension and the moral ambiguity of the scene, because I do feel that it was there. But without it, the scene just ended up feeling forced to me about halfway through. Again, not because of the taboo itself, but because the story just hadn't done the work to support it. And again, this is less of a failure of intent, I think, and more like a disconnect in the execution. One made more noticeably, I think, by the English localization. Again, English localization ambiguity relies heavily on contextual framing rather than linguistic nuance. Now, if we were to go on to the royal bloodline and the hierarchy, which is something I touched on barely earlier, this is where the ambiguity around royalty and succession, I felt kind of should have been a little more important. The card hints that there are other heirs, but we never see how they're selected or how the bloodline works. Now, whether that's biologically or symbolic or something more abstract, it doesn't matter. Because these rules really aren't clearly established. And the tension around their taboo relationship sometimes felt really unsupported. If the story had spent more time establishing the aristocratic hierarchy, really who held power, who's at threat, where Caleb's place in it was, the relationship dynamic, I feel like it would have been a little more grounded. Now, I'm not saying that, taboo can't be in it, but having them be like siblings by title but not by blood, or cousins raised as heirs, or political equivalents bound by lineage rather than biology. I think that kind of clarity could have turned the taboo into more of a narrative tool rather than just a provocative element. It also could have strengthened one of the story's questions, which is why Caleb left the Federation left for the Federation in the first place. And without the context, his departure felt kind of lackluster. It's like they had to do it rather than actually having a vehicle to do it. The other thing that I wish they would have touched on is the same source concept. This is a pre-established concept in Caleb's story as symbolic rather than literal. I think it would have added another layer. Some interpretations, like again, Lad's Butterfly had suggested, and Girly, I think that was an amazing interpretation. I thought I hadn't even thought about it, so I thought it was a really, really a neat interpretation. She suggested that Caleb and MC may not even be fully human. I mean, hello, in classic love in deep space, everybody lives forever kind of thing. So, but if that were integrated into the card more, I think the relationship could have felt thematically rich, again, rather than just provocative. As it stands, it feels more like a familiar Caleb motif than a full realized narrative choice. The ambiguity exists, but it's really uneven. It's heavily implicated, but there's only a light structural support. Of course, this was all spurred on by a comment that was given to me, which is, I think it was a really I think it was a really bad representation of their relationship. Like, even more toxic than the yandere, because at least I get that from the psychological perspective. End quote. And this is really why I wanted to explore Caleb and MC's dynamic more deeply in this card. Because I felt that was super important to kind of go into, not just from the idea of, the outrage, but A lot of us really thought it was going to be contextual, and while it could be still considered contextual, I think they kind of lacked in the context. Also, just a side note, I really liked MC in this card. She felt very fiery and very spicy, and I really enjoyed it. But I personally, I think MC was my favorite in this one because I just really liked her attitude in this card. But my final takeaway for how I felt about this card, I liked it. I liked the story, and I appreciated the characters in the moments and the feeling and the music as well. You know, I enjoyed the card. However, I don't believe it fully did justice to Caleb and MC's characters. The taboo, while thematically aligned with their psychological dynamics, became too foregrounded for me, sometimes at the expense of the world building and the narrative clarity. I really wish the ambiguity could have been anchored a little bit more with maybe the hierarchy or the lineage or the same source. It would have made it feel more intentional rather than shock driven. Now, a majority of the card did feel like the ambiguity would have helped. I think it's just that one scene that sort of, I'm hesitant to say the word ruined. It didn't ruin it for me, but it definitely took me out because it just felt like it was thrown in there rather than having any agency for the characters or anything like that. The card did have a lot of potential, and I enjoyed it in parts, but the uneven execution left the relationship feeling less coherent. So, yeah, that's my official take on it. Now that I've broken down the card and gotten into a subject that I never thought I would get into the history of, I think it's important to acknowledge that not everyone experiences things the same way. The reactions in the community were varied, and I think understandably so. Some people felt a moral discomfort, while others approached it thoughtfully and recognized the symbolic or narrative framework that was part of the story. However, I tend to experience reactions and people's reactions a little bit differently. I'm a disengager. If I don't like something, I just don't engage with it. So I get super confused when people have outrage, particularly about something that's not even out yet. Because I think context matters, and I think it's important to go into something with a pretty open mind when dealing with anything, really. I don't really take things at face value. I like to go in with what they're, with an open mind of what they may be about. And then if I don't end up liking it, which happens, then I just don't like it and I just don't engage with it. Anyway, I sit in the middle. But I also understand why some people would have strong reactions to this card. Between the localization not being rendered as clearly as it could have and the quote, cultural and historical context of the subject matter, I think it's perfectly valid for someone to say that the card isn't for them. I do want to emphasize that you have to have read the card. If you don't read the card and you have something loud to say, I really I want you to have context first before you start making, I don't even want you making accusations. I just think that you should experience something fully. And if you don't, then that's fine. You don't need to engage with it, but you don't need to tell other people how to run their lives. Anyway, I'm trying to be nice here. I'm sorry. I also agree with the comment that was given to me. I don't think the card was strong enough to carry the English localization fully. I felt it was too ambiguous for the English language. But I do think that the pre-release outrage wasn't fair at all. Like, it's hard to judge a story before it's seen in full context, and Infold is infamous. We're really aware that Infold really likes to use shock value in their trailers, and it often doesn't reflect the wider narrative. So I think it's fair that a lot of times the pre-release outrage is just not necessary. I will note that a lot of the loudest discourse does often come from platform culture. I will be naming it X and Twitter. It rewards brevity and amplifies extremes and creates an illusion of consensus. I'm just going to say I hate Twitter. I don't like it at all. I have a Twitter so that I can do my banner breakdowns and my lads latest. But I don't engage with Twitter. You cannot have a meaningful conversation on Twitter with anyone without it ending with a KYS. So I just don't engage with Twitter at all. I think it's a cesspool. I'm sorry. I'm trying to be really nice. I don't believe that anybody should be on Twitter or X. Unfortunately, a lot of the fan art is really good on there. But any meaningful conversation or literary understanding or analysis of the world is not there. I also think this goes in a lot of times with literary understanding. A lot of the world now doesn't have a literary understanding or comprehension, which is unfortunate because I think it kind of leaves a lot of media to be very surface level, which is not why I play this game. I play this game because of the depth of the literary analysis that it provides. I do want to say that a lot of Caleb girlies, and you guys can answer at the bottom if you want. I feel like a lot of Caleb girlies really enjoyed this card, which to me is the most important out of it. While I do obviously want a good card as a harem girly, the card is not supposed to be meant for everybody. It's supposed to be meant for the Caleb girls. And if you can go into the card not being a Caleb girl and understand that Caleb's character is a certain way, then I think that's fine. You should, the comment was from a person who's not a Caleb girl, but she understands Caleb's complexities. And I think that's important to note because Caleb is a very complex character. And I think, anyway, Caleb girlies, let me know down in the comments if you enjoyed Caleb's card. If you didn't, I'm also really interested on how you thought it could have improved or why you didn't like it in the first place. Anyway, all of this is to say that aside from the comments spurring me wanting to go into a deeper dive, I also felt it was super important for me to model a place that was open for interpretations. It's a lot more than just saying who or who shouldn't play the game and what should and shouldn't exist in the game. I don't think that's a conversation that could be had. I think what should be open is that it's okay to feel discomfort while also appreciating the literature intention, or disagreeing with certain choices without shaming others who feel differently. I don't think everyone needs to engage with challenging content, and I think that's totally valid too. But my goal was to provide a sort of a gray space for reflection and discussion, and to analyze and interpret Love in Deepspace, because Love in Deepspace is very rich and deep in their literary meanings and how they go about doing storytelling. It's why I engage with the story and the game in the first place. So yeah, that's just, I'm going to go over my last 3 questions also. So back to my original 3 questions. Did they do the relationship justice? Was incest necessary for the plot, or did it primarily do the shock value? And did storytelling prioritize clarity or rely on the taboo to carry the weight? The first question, they started out really, really strong with the relationship. I thought they were on a road where the relationship could have been justified pretty well, especially in the garden scene. I think that's one of my favorite scenes, because it really was reminiscent of main story Caleb, and I think that could have been really, really a good way to continue to do the push and pull. It was feeling really, really nice. But about halfway through in that one scene, I really just, I think that it lost all credence, unfortunately. Towards the end, it started to feel like they were giving it justice again, but I think that scene, for me in particular, just kind of it lost its momentum for me in particular. Was it necessary to the plot, or was it primarily shock value? Again, I think at the beginning it definitely was necessary to the plot, and had there been a little more world building, it really could have been something really neat, especially with the bedroom scene. Had it had a little bit more world building, it would have been, I think, a really good plot device. But that one scene changed it to shock value. Again, I think this is particularly in the English language, which I think is acceptable to analyze along with that. Now, I could say that in the Chinese language, it may not have been as much of a shock value because of the context beforehand and the understanding and the cultural understanding of where these languages start. But for the English one, it definitely turned into shock value for me, which is unfortunate. And did the storytelling prioritize clarity or rely on the taboo? Unfortunately, it did not prioritize clarity. You guys can go back and listen to what I said. But there were so many cool things that they could have done. So many with the same source and with the lineage and the aristocratic hierarchy and all of that. Really could have been some cool things to enhance the taboo incest, but it just kind of fell flat for me, unfortunately. So anyways, the purpose of this discussion was never to react for react's sake. It was never to police anything or anything like that. It was about looking at the narrative intent and really to kind of break down sort of the history of where the subject matter comes from, that this is not something that's new. But also to state that the ambiguity, both between language and localization, how it kind of shaped everything for everybody. I think it rationally, if you've looked at the card or you've taken at, what others have said, it's totally fair to, however you felt about it, I think it's totally fair. Not the false outrage. But I also want to remind everybody that it's okay to disengage if something doesn't feel comfortable for you. At the end of the day, it's really just about understanding and not policing taste. And I want to consider multiple perspectives, not just say, we'll get over it because it's going to be in storytelling. I don't think it's about the discomfort. I think it's about the way the story was told in this instance. And I wouldn't have made a video if I didn't think that it was a poor representation. I would have just left it as is, and I would have streamed it. But I think in this case, I'm really glad that I recorded it because it gave me some time to really understand how I felt about the card. And I think that's important. It's also important to respect personal boundaries. But yeah, I think that's all I've got for you guys today. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them down in the comments. Again, I'm going to reiterate, be respectful, please. I'm happy to have a discussion with anybody, but anything that entices just get over it, or it shouldn't be, basically anything that's going to prompt in an X or Twitter argument, I will not be responding to it. That's a personal boundary of mine. I want to have an open discussion about something. It's not about whether it should be in this story or whether someone should or shouldn't interact with the story itself. While I agree that disengaging is good, it's not about that. So please keep it respectful in the comments down below. Thank you all so much for watching. It feels weird. If you liked this video, I don't do them very often, but feel free to like and subscribe for more. I also have an Instagram and Blue Sky where I post nearly every day. I also stream every Tuesday at noon PST on YouTube. This next Tuesday, we will be going through the rest of the story. Finally get to see Raffi fight. Yeah. This won't be the first. This isn't the first one. This won't be the last one, so I'll probably have to do another one, and that's fine. I don't mind. I like doing this. I think a deep dive into things like this is fun. But I hope that you guys have a great rest of your week. Thanks for watching, and As always, stay safe out there, hunters, both mentally and physically.